Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this week's episode of The Cloud Gurus, brought to you by CloudBolt Software. In last week's episode, we introduced the theme of this season being that 2023 is really the year for the data center. And what we meant by that is that as we meet with IT leaders, more and more we are hearing their focus transition from a digital first, push everything to the public cloud approach to more of a pragmatic, how do we ensure we've got the right balance of investments between public cloud and on-premise architecture? I couldn't be more excited that we are starting with today's episode because we will be interviewing an old colleague of mine who has a wealth of expertise in the world of platform engineering and platform architecture. His name is Jason Rinehart, and I'll let him introduce himself, but one thing I will tell you is any conversation with Jason is going to be an insightful one and a really fun one at that. So I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you for tuning in, and here's that interview. All right, Jason Rinehart, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Will, thanks.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. And, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a few reasons. One, it feels like we don't catch up enough. And when we do, we end up having just awesome conversation that goes real deep, which I think is great for this format. But, we might have to watch ourselves a little bit because usually you and I can just go on and on and on. So we'll try to.
Yeah, we don't have that much time. So.
Middle of the work week. We got to be careful. But thank you so much for jumping on. Here's what I do know. No matter where this conversation goes, it'll probably be insightful and it'll always be a heck of fun to chat with you. So I think it's probably important for me to kind of talk about how we know each other. And I'll give a bit of background on how we met and kind of the role that you had and worked together. And I think it's probably important that you give a little bit more context as to where you've been and kind of what your credentials are. But so when I started in managed services, I was in way over my head, as you probably remember, and I was learning a lot about the cloud all at once and learning a lot about how managed services and professional services worked in general and consulting. And I think it was a very interesting exercise. And you happened to work at the firm that I started with, which was 10th Magnitude, now kind of gobbled up by Cognizant Technology and no longer there, but a very focused, strategic, essentially Microsoft partner focused on the Azure world and just the Azure world across, professional services and managed services. And it was the first time that I'd ever been introduced to this concept of platform architecture, platform engineering. And that was the role you were sitting in at the time, and you did a really great job. And I think through our time together, not only did I see you as a mentor and somebody I learned a lot from, but I really started to understand the importance of that role and how it fits, especially from a services perspective, because obviously in the services world, you have a whole bunch of technology that you have to have internally to support your customers and your services and all that stuff. And being on the edge of kind of what's cutting edge and what's new, somebody to kind of get their arms around all of that was really important strategically. And then obviously the customers have their own tech stacks and you have to integrate and be able to service. And that was kind of the first time I'd heard about this position. But obviously, you've been in this kind of space for a long period of time, even before 10th Magnitude and certainly after. So why don't you give a little bit about your background and, kind of where you first came into the platform architecture role?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, I felt the same way about when I first met you, because I thought, man, this guy, I can really learn a lot about customer relationships, customer support, service management. I mean, the whole thing. So I don't know that you know this, but I looked up to you in that respect on, how positive you were about everything and just the way that you approached situations, especially difficult situations. So it goes both ways.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a little bit about me. I started wanting to be a doctor. So out of high school, and I'm going in the way back machine right now because I'm
love it.
and you're young, and and I get it. But I think it's important for anybody listening to understand that it doesn't really matter because you can always end up where you are meant to be. Um, and the journey is either fun or painful, depending on how you look at it. So for me, it was painful in the beginning, but it turned out really great. And so I started wanting to be a doctor, and that's what I went to college for. And then I realized, holy crap, I want a social life. So what's the next best thing for me to do that I can still have a social life, but do cool stuff? And that's technology. Um, and that was back in the day where not everybody had a computer, and you definitely didn't have a smartphone because that didn't even exist. And
That's right.
so, I mean, yeah, seriously, it was monochrome screens and pull out antennas. It wasn't like it is today. So anyway, after a series of adventures and such, I ended up realizing that the same spirit that I had about wanting to be a doctor, which was serving people and tending to the needs of others, I could do that with technology. And that really kind of led me into the consulting arena where I would really kind of take what I had learned and then try to apply that to other companies' environments because they would typically reach out to the company that I was with at the time because something was wrong and they needed help and or they needed something new that they didn't know anything about. And so I would get brought in to help fix those things and to make those IT administrators lives better. And that was something that was super cool. And so along the way I realized, well shoot, we should be doing this as a service. And
That's
so
right.
Um, this was back in the early 2000s. Managed services wasn't new. It's not a new concept, you know. But for this part of the country, it's either really good or really bad. And so I thought, well, I can do this better than anybody else can, or at least the environments that I went into to rescue businesses from bad service providers. So let's just create something and sell it. And so I spent a year and a half at a consultancy doing that. And then from there, um, I realized, holy smokes, technology is changing so much, so fast. This is not the future. Traditional managed services and traditional data center stuff. I gotta get in the cloud. And so I realized that the next step for me was I gotta I gotta get to the cloud. And I went to uh, popular job board and I saw this advertisement for 10th magnitude, this platform architect. And I was just reading through it. I'm like, well, shoot, that's fantastic. I mean, it exposes all areas of the business and you're exposed to some business things, process things, but you're also involved in the technology. And I'm like, that's what I desire to do because not only do I want to do that for other companies, but I want to be a positive impact in my own organization. And this is the best way to do it. And so that began, my cloud journey. Gosh, that's 7 years ago now. Um, and here, here we are today.
Still rocking and rolling. This is probably the first time I've ever heard you say you were planning on being a doctor, and it doesn't really surprise me at all because you think about, I mean, there's kind of a metaphor there around, doctors, they see a patient, they've got all this wealth of knowledge across all these different medicines and procedures and options. And it's like finding the right thing that makes sense for the moment. I think is a lot of what we do in consulting and technology consulting specifically. The platform architect role, I've worked with plenty of platform architects at this point across many service providers, and I'm starting to see more and more kind of this trend in enterprises where the platform architecture role is not only something that is becoming more strategic, so I think it's leveling up in where it sits within the organization as technology adoption has grown and it's become more complex, and you start to kind of look at multiple clouds, multiple service stacks, global audiences, distributed workforce, and all the things we've had happen over the past, let's just call it 10 years. But it's one of those roles that I think service providers have had for quite a while and they've needed to maintain. Yeah, I'd love to hear your definition of what a platform architect is, and why is it such a key role in this kind of new modern IT landscape?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's really two things. It's vision and enablement. You know, we've talked about this before ad nauseum, um, but a lot of organizations don't realize that they've got platform architects because they call them different things. And um, really, the platform architect is unique because it's not enterprise architecture, it's not cloud architecture, it's not infrastructure architecture, it's not security architecture, it's the platform architecture. And if you think about that and you really start to think about what's in a name, the platform is the base by which everything else is built upon. If you've got a shaky platform, everything else is going to fall apart. So the platform architect really sets the vision for what's possible, and it provides that vision and that foundation to make those things a reality. And so the platform architect really, I mean, it spans, and it has to span all areas of the business. If you're thinking about the typical consultancy, you've got pre-sales, you've got sales, you've got project management, you've got delivery, professional services, and now managed services. It spans all of those things because you really have to have a holistic understanding of the organization of the business, of what we're trying to really accomplish in order to inform your decision making on what are the things that we should look to, what are the applications and tools that we should focus on, what decisions do we need to make so that the leadership teams can make informed choices on how the business needs to go, the direction by which we need to head. I mean, so really, in a nutshell, that's really platform architecture from the experience that I've had being a platform architect now for almost half a decade.
Yeah, I think there's this assumption that it's just, hey, what technology do we need and when should we be using it and where should we be using it? But I think that's almost undercutting the value of this role, because you think about the decisions that businesses have to make. And you just gave a great example around service providers, but you think about a modern organization. I think this day and age, everybody has to call themselves a technology organization, whether or not they're Nike or a tech forward company like Tesla. Like, it doesn't really matter. Everybody has some sort of technology outfit. They have to. And from a platform architecture perspective, it really is, hey, what is the value we're trying to extend to our clients, both internally and externally? And how do we best achieve that with the investments that we have aligned to things like process, projects, people, and just where we want to go, goals within the business. Right now, you see a lot of silos in companies in the IT world, right? In the IT space, you've got DevOps and SecOps, and now Cloud Ops, and some companies now have FinOps, and there's AI Ops. This is kind of this next wave for a lot of folks. And then there's different strategies across the different clouds. You've got teams that oversee one public cloud versus another. You've got regional distribution, and in a lot of companies, what they're battling is that each one of these segments of the business or business units has their own technology preferences, their own investments, their own processes, their own ways of doing things. Even sometimes it's different structures of people and hierarchy. And when I look at a role like platform architecture, I think that's a role that really needs to align at that top layer, like you're talking about, where they should have a little bit more strategic involvement at the top to look at all the pieces of the puzzle and make sure they all make sense, right? And it's not just eliminating technology, it's deciding, between that balance of when do we have cohesive and unified approaches to things, and when do we allow a little bit of flexibility independence within the business. And that's something you've always done really well. But I'd love for you to kind of explore that a little bit and talk about what's your decision framework on how to find that balance.
Yeah, that's a, I mean, that's a really great question because that's really it. Right? I mean, you could, if you can figure that out as an organization, you're instantly going to be successful because not only do you have an environment which is cohesive and standardized, but you've also got this spirit of entrepreneurship where teams and individuals are free to go innovate and create things that are their own that they can then submit and contribute back to the larger organization. Platform architecture, I mean, it really is involved in all of the other aspects. Silos are terrible because silos means that there is no flow of information, there's no communication, amongst the various types of teams. And if you don't have that level of communication and that openness and that spirit of contribution, then you can't grow, you can't innovate. I guess you probably could innovate on some level, but it's going to slow things down significantly because the approach that I've always taken, and this has worked well in my experience, is even if somebody is, let's say, is in HR or finance, and you're talking to them about a particular solution or a particular thing, it's important that they provide feedback and they give their perspective because that goes into the overall design that impacts the actual thing that is created and or delivered. And it's because you involve all of these various entities and their perspectives that you create something that couldn't ever be created without all of that impact from the broad organizational structure. So that's one thing. The other thing is my favorite part of platform architecture is building the bridges to break those silos down, because there's nothing that I love more than bringing teams of people together that have nothing in common whatsoever, that can then learn that each of their voices are extremely valuable and extremely important to the overall goal, and that the thing that we all create together is going to be something wholly unique and extremely sophisticated and something that not one of us could have done ourselves. But it takes all of us in order to create this thing and to realize the vision, even if it's just assessing things, deciding on how we're going to work together. That's huge. Deciding on what types of tools we're going to use as a team. All of those things are the responsibility and part of what a real platform architect is going to be expected to take on. And that's that. Really, if I'm being honest with myself, that's what I really love about it. Is bringing teams of people together.
Yeah, breaking down the barriers, and it's it's interdisciplinary, right? It's how do you get all these different folks with opinions and thoughts and judgments into one room and making again those unified decisions.
Because not only are you a technologist, which you have to be. I can't get as deep as I used to be, and sometimes that bothers me because I do love technology. But at the same time, you got to have a business mindset as well and think about things, differently from the technology, and that's really unique in platform architecture because you got to bring those two together. You've got your C-suite that's thinking about business, and they had these great business ideas, but typically they're not going to have any idea how to make that a technological reality, and then you've got tech people that they're really good at tech and they can tell you all about that, but they don't necessarily understand how that translates to business. And so that's where your platform architect comes in to play, is they help you translate, back and forth between technology to business and business to technology.
That's a good point. And I think at both layers, what I see pretty often is that they don't actually understand the risk involved with just choosing a technology or choosing an approach and going forward, right? One of the key traits, maybe this is a great question to kind of lead into. One of the great traits I think about a platform architect is having that systems thinking. Being able to go, okay, if I if I knock over this domino, what are the subsequent dominoes that are going to fall, and how are all these things interconnected? Because to your point, your top level leadership wants to achieve some sort of outcome, and we've seen over the past few years this sticker shock of, well, we wanted to, be super competitive in this space with this program and this initiative, but wow, we had no idea it was going to cost this much. And to the dev, and listen, you said we're all in love with the technology. I agree. I always make the joke, I was selling the first iPhones at Best Buy when I was 15. And we all want the latest iPhone. We all want the latest whatever, right? Like the consumer in us, especially if you're in the field of technology, you want to play with the cutting edge. And all of these providers are introducing so many new services, and there's all this stuff that's just constantly flooding in that's exciting to play with. If you're a developer, you want to get your hands on what's the newest, but there's a lot of risk. So I come back to, at the top level and at the lower levels, I shouldn't say lower levels, but in the practitioners, it's almost like they're trying to get that thing achieved, and they really aren't thinking about it in a framework across the business as to how are these decisions and initiatives going to affect the rest of the organization, and tying that all together, I think, is a really important trait. What are some other traits that you would say are important? I kind of see the platform architect as being somebody that has to be senior in the world of technology. What are some things that come to mind?
Well, I mean, listen, you can't fear failure. That's a huge one. You've got to be comfortable in embracing failures, and failures can be anything. Lessons learned, actual failures, things that don't work. You've got to be really, really good at recognizing those, moving on from them, and really kind of having a thick skin about things. And for me, what I've, personally, I used to be real stubborn, real hard headed, and some of this I still work on, and is still something that I challenge myself with all the time. But the other thing is you can't get stuck in a rut, and you can't have tunnel vision. You really need to be constantly looking at different things and different ways of doing things. And you can't have an opinion that's set in stone, because just like technology, your opinion needs to change as the technology changes. And as new things come along, you've got to be flexible to be able to change with those. And you can't be flexible if you're stuck in a certain pattern or a certain way of doing things. You've got to be able to embrace change. Change is your new reality, because the public cloud space, I mean, it transforms so quickly that it's almost impossible to stay on top of, um, especially from an individual perspective. And so, you tend to rely on other people, and that's another personal trait that platform architects really need to have is, you've got to be more humble and more dependent upon the information that you're receiving from those around you, and more receptive to that information, because you can't do it alone.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that interdisciplinary approach. Certainly, it is not a role that sticks in its office and just gets work done. It has to constantly be communicating and collaborating and understanding, and also pushing back and having firm judgment about what makes sense and when, right? Like there's a bit of and I think you said you used to be stubborn. I think in a lot of ways that could be a good trait for this type of role, because you have to be firm when things don't make sense for the business at all levels. You have to be willing to kind of clash with even leadership at times. I would assume, to be like, hey, listen, this this kind of introduction of a technology or tool or process or something along those lines could have repercussions that can be damaging.
Yeah. Yeah, there is an art to selling your your instincts and your opinions, and it would be my hope that organizations wouldn't put people in this type of role that they did not have trust in that individual's ability to make decisions based upon their past experience. But that's something else that you really that you really will get good at, is learning how to be firm in what you've decided. Because if you think about it, the individual hasn't decided that. The whole team has decided that. And so it typically makes that a little bit more palatable to leadership to know that, listen, we've verified this across multiple different organizations in multiple different disciplines inside the organization with several different people with different opinions and ways of thinking. And this is what we've collectively decided on. And I've made the choice that, yes, this is what we're going to do. That makes it quite a bit easier to sell that and to be able to champion that to, impact positive change with the organization. That's, at least that's been my experience. But at the same time, you are going to have to be a kind of a master negotiator, so to speak.
Yeah, it seems like a role that's constantly building business cases for and against things, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, we've talked about the role, we've talked about some of the traits, and I think, a lot of listeners are going, okay, I think I know who, maybe I'd go out and hire if I needed to bring on this title. What about for those practitioners? I mean, what are some of the frameworks that you use or decision-making patterns that you use when you are presented with a new technology or a new system or new tool, something that's cutting edge that's being presented to the business? How are you thinking about introducing new parts to the puzzle? And, when are you saying yes and when are you saying no? And how are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So for me, and some are going to agree, some are going to disagree, and that's totally cool. Um, but for me, it's about what's the impact to the individual. Um, and I'll just use this as an example. But if we're going to create a new observability platform and we're going to expect teams, automation people, whatever, to react to what that observability platform produces, how is that going to impact those individuals that are going to be responsible for the outcome of that? That's the number one thing that I think of. What is it going to do to the individual? And then the next thing I think about is, how is that going to impact my customer? Because if you've got a miserable employee and a miserable individual that's having to, deal with these things, and again, this is from a managed service perspective, you're going to have a less than superior customer experience. And if you don't have good customer experiences, you're never going to sell anything and you're never going to have a customer. So, and then the customers you do have are never going to come back. Um, so, so for me, it's, how does this impact the people? How does this impact our customers? And does this positively change the business itself? And then how do I measure that? So that's something that's often missed, is that last part, which is probably the most crucial to maintaining your decisions and recognizing where things aren't working and the failures so that you can stop and then do something else, is that piece of, how then do I measure whether this is a success or not? And that could be anything. That's the consumption of services. That's the, am I reducing churn? Am I reducing ticket volume, alert volume? Am I increasing customer satisfaction, and however you're measuring that? Net promoter scores, whatever. those are really the four key pillars for when I start evaluating things. And when I look at things, that's how I try to frame it. And then I go from there. And it just depends on what it is I'm trying to solve for. But those are the things that really kind of frame how I look at the world.
It brings back something I was harping on in a webinar and a couple of road shows I did recently in the FinOps world, and it's just kind of it's a funny thing that I always think to myself as like as a software vendor, I've been in so many conversations with procurement teams where even for a small selling price, even for something very basic, just a starter kind of thing, um, I am required B2B sales to build this rock solid business case, show the value, express what, problems that the business currently has that, we would solve, give an ROI, give a TCO, like total cost of ownership, all these things, even for the most fundamental sale, and really put through the ringer. And what I think is so funny, Jason, you probably have seen this a lot too, is within the business, there's none of that, right? There's nothing that close to like an internal procurement team that's going, why exactly do we need to introduce this new tech stack? Or why have we decided to go all in on Terraform Enterprise? Or why exactly do we need a seventh Kanban software for this team, right? Like that type of scrutiny, we're so willing to talk to our external vendors, all of us, right? And really hold them accountable to why exactly do we need this? But internally, we just kind of go, all right, like, you say you need it, I trust you. It's a funny thing. I don't know if, your role would be one that goes, hey, this doesn't fit the puzzle, right? This doesn't fit the strategy as to what we're trying to do.
Yeah. You earlier you mentioned, um, things about the what, the where, the when, but the most important thing for the platform is the why. I mean, why? Why do you do it that way? Well, we do it that way because of this. Because that team, that individual can see the future. You don't actually see the future. Well, that's a popular misconception, but you can see the future because the experience that you've built up has taught you things, and you start to see patterns in places, and then you can start to answer those questions of, well, why? Why do we have this seventh Kanban board when in reality, should you have six? Well, yeah, why? And then here's the why, So that's something that's important. But internally, I would argue that it's really, let's be real. It's probably laziness. That's probably why. It's probably because we're not as sophisticated internally as we are externally to our customers and how we operate customer environments, et cetera. And so, it's that old saying, the plumber's pipes are the worst. And that's probably the reason why our internal tooling and our internal systems are like the way that they are, because in reality, we don't think about that because we're too busy focused on other things, when in reality, we need to be focused on those internal things because those internal things impact how fast and with what type of quality we can go to do customer things.
Yeah, and listen, when you get back to just the core fundamentals of business, and it's like you make money, you lose money, right? And all these other metrics and things that we attach to, you could argue are attached to, one of those two things. Low efficiency means you're losing money faster, right? The reason that I think this conversation is so relevant right now is I am seeing with all and I'd love for you to comment on this as well, because obviously you talk to customers all the time, but I am seeing in higher levels of leadership this renewed emphasis on efficiency.
Oh yeah.
And really understanding like why are we doing things and how do we streamline our core competencies, our investments, how we make money, how we operate internally, because waste is no longer, oh, we've got X amount of licenses left over from the purchase we made 5 years ago from Microsoft. It's, with SaaS and cloud, waste is ongoing loss, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, there's a lot. There's a lot to that. We could probably have just an hour where we talk about governance just
Sure.
by itself. But that's one of the things that's huge. I know currently I'm constantly hearing do more with less. Do more with less. Well, I mean, do do what with less? I mean, I need all of these things. Well, yeah, but do you really need those things? Well, you can't have this new thing, so you're going to have to figure out how to do what we need to do with the stuff that we have. Oh, and then by the way, you're now going to cut 30% out of the things that we have. And so we're coming out of this mindset of excess and really kind of technical gluttony, as I call it. And we're now going into, holy cow, we've got all of this stuff we've accumulated, and now we need to start shedding some of this and getting leaner and more efficient. Because as we talk to our customers about and up on our soapboxes about how you've got to have financial governance and you've got to make sure that you're operating in the cloud efficiently and blah blah blah. Now when those chickens are kind of coming home to roost for all of these organizations that are saying those things, because now we've got to figure out, shoot, I really do have to do more with less. And that's a great opportunity for process automation, process refinement. How do we make best use of AI that's out there? How do we then pivot and start taking a look at the tooling we have in place to make our lives easier so that we can then start to do more with less? Because once you start shrinking everything and you start restricting access to funding or cloud resources or tools or whatever, it forces you to start thinking of different ways and becoming more creative in how to accomplish the same or better. And so in some respects, it's very painful and I don't like it. Because I like options and I like the ability to pick and choose. But then at the same time, it's almost a relief because now we can start to get clearer pictures of what the real landscape is like when we start to shed off that old stuff that might be technical baggage, paying back that technical debt when the technical debt collector comes calling, and start to really hone in and think about what's really right for the business and for our customers. And it's not having 1,000 different tools. It's being more efficient and more responsive and better able to handle whatever it is, no matter what your staff looks like. That's really where we're being forced to move to now. And I think that's a good thing. Because just like the shift from traditional data centers in the private cloud, the shift of what that work and what those people were expected to do when you're managing a private data center to now you're managing public cloud, it's vastly different. There's a translation path to getting there, but it's different. And there are different expectations. And now we're seeing that where we're starting to see the shrinking again of this growth of cloud consumption. Now we're starting to see some shrinking and some really streamlining so that we can now begin the transition of this doing more with less in preparation for the next increase of whatever that looks like. I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's what I'm seeing. And as much as I don't like it, at the same time, I can see that's happening really. And I'm really kind of excited about what that's going to bring because it's going to force a lot of organizations to rethink what they're doing. And that's always a good thing.
I agree. I'm seeing the exact same thing. And my thesis is that enterprises are starting to get privy to the idea. When I say enterprises, I really mean IT leaders, are starting to warm up to the idea of we cannot let this be super democratic in the business. We can't allow every cost owner in the business to make decisions on just their cost center, because what ends up happening is the loss of efficiency and the loss of cohesiveness and a unified approach. And it drives down our strategic ability for all of our technology. It drives down our ability to compete in the marketplace. The technical gluttony is real. The technical complexity is real. And ultimately, we need a layer in the business that helps us oversee where we're introducing new technologies and processes and making a cohesive, fabric of like all things delivery internal, all things delivery external. And I believe that that's going to very quickly become similar to FinOps in this past couple of years, dedicated people, dedicated teams to go, where do we need to allow decision making to happen at the lowest level and allow people to have a little bit of room? Where do we need to say, no, you don't have a choice? We're making the choice as a company to go with this infrastructure as code stack, right? Or this cloud, or these technologies within the cloud, and building that process and that architecture. You think about the enterprise architecture teams of old, it was really like, is this fitting our governance? Is this fitting our security? Does this match, patterns that we've had on-prem in the past? Does this align with the vendor choices we have? It kind of, that's all important, but in the new world order, I think it's less that and more, are we able to achieve the strategic objectives we have top down with the choices we're making at the bottom? Would you agree with that?
No, that's a great point, because enterprise architecture is typically coming at this from an application perspective, which is important. But at the same time, what about everything else? Because there's a whole bunch more to everything than just your applications. And you can have, I call this the illusion of choice. You can present your organization with options, and if somebody likes Terraform, that's fantastic. Here you go do Terraform. Somebody wants to do Bicep, that's great. You got AWS, you want to do CloudWatch or CloudFormation templates, hey, that's fantastic. But you're not going to allow the other plethora of tooling out there to do infrastructure as code. You're already making decisions before it even reaches the business. And so it's this illusion of choice, which both solves the individualized standardization, as I call it. That's kind of a,
I'm going to steal so many of these terms.
Yeah, no, it's cool. You have my permission and it's recorded. So, but that's really what it is. And, that's what I face today is this, there is not this institutionalized standardization, and there is things being done all over the place, but they're all the same thing. And so why wouldn't we standardize on this thing? It removes the need to have those other teams make decisions. It gets that off their plate. It gives them options on how to go work. And so they can focus on the things that they're actually good at doing, and not making decisions about what tools to pick whenever you've already decided for them. You give them a choice. They have the illusion of choice and the illusion of freedom, but it's the freedom within the confines of what we've already decided as a business we're going to do. And the reason why we've decided those things, your platform architect is going to tell you why, and then you've got that observability plane that says, okay, we've decided this, and this is the reason why. And here you can see the examples of why, because now we've increased efficiencies, or, we've done this or that that's positively impacted the business in one form or another. But yeah.
That is a really good place to leave that conversation. But I got a couple more questions for you, because I think that was about as insightful as I was expecting. What is one thing you're super excited about? Like, how do you see the technology landscape changing over the next few years, and why are you excited to be a part of it?
So I'm both scared and terrified of what AI is going to do. I think it's important that and Microsoft named this appropriately, but it's Copilot. It's this term of, this concept of Copilot. What I'm most excited about is how artificial intelligence is going to change the landscape of how everything works. Not just IT. I mean, it's everything. I introduced my kids to Chat GPT, and I'm like, here are some things, to go play with and experiment with. And as you do your homework and as you think about things, and, go look at Chat GPT and see what happens, double check your work there and see and verify, how this works, and start to think about what this means for you. And it was interesting. My oldest daughter, she was doing some of her geometry and stuff with it, and she's like, "Yeah, but Dad, this doesn't really work for this kind of stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's important to understand, and that's important to see that." I was challenged about that internally at my current organization. Jason, why are you not using AI more in your daily job? And I'm like, I don't see where it fits. But have you tried? I'm like, well, no, I just assumed. So I went and I used it. And I'm like, holy cow, this could actually speed up how I work and how things are done, because some of this stuff is just stuff that I would have to expend my brain power on that I didn't necessarily need to, that I could use something else for. And then I can focus, you know, my thought, my energy on these other things. And so, I'm most excited about how that's going to revolutionize how organizations go to market and things that we produce and create and all those things. But then at the same time, it kind of it's a little scary, because you've got the IBMs of the world that are planning to let go of people over the next 5 years and replace their positions with AI. Well, I think that's wrong. I think what you should do, and what we've done, is the transition from traditional infrastructure to now cloud infrastructure, is train and educate those people to do the AI stuff, because AI is a co-pilot. It's not the driver. It's a co-pilot. You still need that human aspect of our intuition and the way that we see things and put things together, because AI does not have eyeballs. You can't take in the world around. And this is getting way philosophical. Well, I apologize, but
No, I love it. I love it.
but it's kind of, but it's true though. You can't bring in, and AI does not have experience. It has information and quote unquote machine learning, mathematical algorithms and things that
Yep.
it's put together, but it doesn't have the experience that humans have, and the emotional sense that humans have to recognize the world around them. And so that's, it scares me, because I think some organizations are going to try to make AI put front and center, but I think really intelligent organizations are going to make AI a co-pilot, and they're going to figure out how to use AI to make the lives of their people better, which in turn is going to make their business better. And then they're going to figure out ways to make their business go faster and improve business and the products that are then, put out to market. I think that's what I'm super excited about, and at the same time, really terrified about.
I think we all have to have a little fear and scrutiny with it. It it does shed a little bit into how you think in that response, Jason, which I would say to those hiring managers out there, if you're looking for a platform architect, find somebody who thinks the way that Jason just explained that, because the way you were talking about with your kids, like, hey, it's important for you to go understand the positives and negatives and find out where the gaps are, and where you need to make up the difference. That's the kind of thought process that organizations need to have with technology. So it was like a non-platform architecture question that you answered perfectly. I'll give you one that there's no possible way you can answer as a platform architect, which is, I'd be remiss to ever have a call with you and not talk about the most recent craft beer you're drinking, because I know you're a huge fan. So yeah, give us 2 or 3 recommendations, and then we'll wrap this up.
All right, listen, you guys that are listening to this, if you're not in Oklahoma, you can't get it. So you'll probably have to look at some type of some type of online beer purchasing thing. But one of my favorite longtime breweries, which is out of Midwest City, Oklahoma, it's called Rough Tail. They have a new series out. They're unique, special beer that they do every year, and it's different every year. It's never the same. It's called the Cryptid series, and it's all about these mythical creatures. And so the first one was Mothman's Monocle, and then there's the Jersey Devils, Jorts, and then now the most recent one that they just released a couple of weeks ago is called Ongampogo's Go-Go's. And it's this, big snake like the Loch Ness Monster, but it's got go-go boots on it. But anyway, Rough Tail's Cryptid series, however you got to get that, go get them. Right now there's 3 that they've released, and they're all absolutely phenomenal IPAs. And it's cryptid because they're using these very weird, bizarre hops, these very experimental strains of hops and stuff. And so they're all very unique, and they'll never ever happen again. And so if you can go find them, go get them, because you're in for a real treat, because they're phenomenal.
Well, and just like that, the inventory is gone because Reinhardt and in no way affiliated, I imagine. I'm gonna.
Absolutely not.
We're not on video right now, Jason, but I'm gonna and you don't have to answer this. I'm gonna bet you're sipping on something like that right now. So,
it's yes, Everything Rhymes with Orange by Rough Tail. That's one of my dailies. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jason, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you and I always have conversations like this anyhow, so I hope it wasn't too much on your plate, but we'd love to have you back.
Love it.
And thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure, Will. It's good to talk to you, bro.
All right. Bye, bud.